Well, good morning, everybody. As you're watching this satellite animation of Tropical Storm Calvin going right toward Hawaii as the sun was setting this evening here across the Pacific, I want to give you two quick announcements, all right? The first one is an apology. I left on a 4-day road trip. I'm giving talks all over the country this week, and I forgot my professional mic, and I apologize for that. I know the sound quality on this computer I'm recording on is not as good as when I have that professional mic, so I'll get that back going on Friday, and I just apologize for that. The second thing is I normally do an in-depth report on Monday night and on Thursday night. I'm going to pull back on those for the next 6 months. And the reason for that is I've gotten the green light to do some really important research I've wanted to complete for about 3 years now on what we call subseasonal weather forecasting. Now, that doesn't mean I won't give any long-range content. I'm actually going to be putting it into these morning videos so that you still have access to that on a regular cadence. But I'm also in the process of working with my team on finally delivering our mobile app. We've been working on it. It'll take us a few more months to complete, but I am super excited to be able to share that with you because it'll have some what I hope to be the best industry insights when it comes to weather and its impact on agriculture and so many other things. So that's what's going on with me. I just wanted to keep you aware of that, but we'll still keep these daily cadence of videos going here early in the morning, but they're going to start to include a lot more long-range stuff in them, all right? Okay, Calvin, Tropical Storm Calvin. Now, it's interesting as you see this moving to the south here as the sun was setting, late in the day here on Tuesday night, the system is falling apart. And that's what typically happens as these tropical cyclones get over to this part of the world. They just tend to lose the ingredients they need, especially the heat, to just stay quite strong. But speaking of strong, there will be quite strong winds throughout the night tonight across Hawaii and then into tomorrow morning. And every time we watch tropical cyclones that get near Hawaii, there's always going to be a question of how good are the surfing conditions going to be. So I just want to show you here, if I just kind of rock back and forth in the overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning, we are expecting swells to be in that probably 12 to 18 foot range, especially on the Big Island. So imagine there's going to be a lot of people taking advantage of just the incredible surfing conditions out of Tropical Storm Calvin. Okay, so from there, let's come back to the U.S., and I'm going to show you what happened last night or yesterday evening with respect to severe weather. We had multiple rounds of severe storms that came out of parts of Missouri into Kentucky, Tennessee, into the southeast, and we currently have almost 100,000 customers in Tennessee without power at this particular point. And on radar, these storms look something like this. So there were actually a couple of rounds we're going to pay attention to. Watch this restart. There's the big squall line that moves through, gets through Tennessee down here into parts of Alabama, Georgia. And then there's a second round that was happening in the overnight right into this area as well, just as I was recording this just before 5 a.m. here on Wednesday morning. Now, that's not the only storm system, of course, in town. We had isolated severe events that were throughout much of the northern plains, including some big hailers up here as well. There was a large storm that went near Pierre that produced a tremendous amount of hail. And it's kind of interesting. I told you I was supposed to be in Pierre. I was supposed to fly to St. Louis to get there, but I missed that flight. So I've spent the last 12 hours driving. And it was interesting because I got to watch some of these storms, and I missed the one in Pierre producing all that hail because I had to take the drive up here. But if you just have a look right now at what the storm reports look like, we can clearly see some of the damaging winds that were down here throughout parts of the Ohio and Tennessee Valley, and then the isolated severe events here in the northern plains with the large hail. Now, just showing you what it looks like right now to see the hail. This is just, look at this whole region in through here. But let's just kind of zoom in and get an idea. Yeah, we have several of these storms that just in the last 24 hours were producing baseball to softball size hail. Isolated events, but they're clearly showing up on the radar data. Now, when you see them on satellite, this was just as the sun was rising here over the east this morning. Let me take you back to yesterday. You can just see a couple of things here. More of that wildfire smoke making its way down into the south. This is all the cloud cover from the large complexes of storms that rolled out of Missouri into parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, and then into the northern parts of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And then late in the day, that's the guy right there. That was the big supercell that just popped. I watched the lightning from it for hours as I was driving this direction. You could see it from a long way off. And that's the one that produced very large hail right here in the central part of South Dakota. Now, that's not to ignore other storms. That's not to ignore the smoke that was coming through here, or you can actually see the wildfire right here in this part of Oregon as well. But I was just kind of pointing out a few of these bigger events that have happened. So through 4 a.m. this morning, this is what I've got for the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation. Again, more storms rolling through parts of Nebraska where we needed rain. We're filling in some of the holes down here in Missouri that, were very difficult to fill in with some heavy rainfall, and more that has fallen here in New England, adding to the flooding problems that have gone on there. But as we take a look at where this pattern is going to go moving forward, we're going to ask that question about where the severe weather is going to be, and we're going to look at kind of the threat of some heat moving into the middle part of the country out of the west, and what that might mean in terms of timing it with precipitation events. So let's get into this. Early this morning, using one of my favorite websites, blitzertongue.org, I was just monitoring where the active storms were. So you can just kind of see on the lightning here, a lot of storms coming just south of St. Louis, but out of Missouri, cutting across where the Ohio River and the Mississippi River meet into Kentucky and Tennessee. So very active storms continuing in this area, heavy rain. And remember, this is where our power outages are right now. But as you look forward later in the day today, just take a look at what the flow is doing. We've got strong flow coming through the Caribbean. It's going over the Yucatan. It's being pulled into parts of Mexico and then into Texas, and it's just running into a boundary sitting right in through here. And to the north, we're watching a low pressure cell that's coming through here, bringing in some cooler weather, but it's kind of the collision of these two air masses that's really setting up another day of watching for strong to severe storms. So we're going to watch the lingering frontal boundary here and the new frontal boundary sweeping through here later on today on the 19th for the risk of those strong to severe storms. Going into the 20th, the front continues to advance, but it's going to push up against, remember you saw it there, that stalled out boundary. So here's the front advancing, but it can't get pretty far into the south. We're going to keep the heat on in the south, but to the north of it, I'm expecting storms to run over the top of that ridge. By day 3, which would be the 21st of July, this is just the latest update we got from the Storm Prediction Center on where those storms are going to be. And as we always talk about with these high-resolution models, they are often not going to get the timing, but they're at least going to give us the idea on where those corridors are going to be for the active weather. So early this morning, we can see them here in the main front that's swiping through, and also some of the storms that are here in parts of the mid-Atlantic into Virginia. So we're going to watch for these complexes of storms to roll in this direction today, but again, keep an eye right here, because as I go through Wednesday afternoon and evening, that's where we're going to start to watch for more isolated severe events to show up on the front that's coming through. We will watch Colorado getting into parts of western Kansas again today for those severe storms to pop late in the evening. Now, just playing this forward, you can see where your boundary stalls out here as the front sweeps through parts of Michigan into Illinois, getting the overnight hours going into Thursday. And that's where we're going to see the storms of the overnight hours getting into Thursday. And just playing it out there, again, more storms running over the ridge here. The frontal boundary sweeps through, bringing in a lot of cooler air by the time we get into Friday, and then things kind of dry out and cool off behind this. So let's just take a look from there out to the next 7 days, the latest update I have from the WPC. So you know why these storms are coming in. We're watching the ridge riders here, the frontal boundary sweeping through, making its way into New England. But you're going to notice behind that a lot of drier air kind of funneling into this area. The heat stays on in Texas into Oklahoma, and we're going to stay drier in those areas as well, with the exception of just pop-up isolated storms that happen all the time in summer here. And we're going to see that the heat that's in the west start to move its way into the midsection of the country as this larger ridge begins to flex into that area. So like I did yesterday morning, I'd like to show you the European model, but going out 10 days looking at precipitation anomalies. And what I'm specifically looking for here is who's going to be driest over these next 10 days according to the model. And you can kind of identify a few areas with storms in between that we are expecting to be overall drier. So this is critical to watch, because as the heat comes out of the west into these areas, it's going to be important to see if we do put any stress on the crop. Now, as the ridge opens, I will be watching carefully for a corridor in through here to get ridge riding storms. And you can see that some of that's coming into the Canadian Prairie. And that's been an area we've been actively watching for drought. The last 30 days, this is a percent of normal map. While we've had a lot of severe weather that's come into parts of, Ontario into Quebec, you come back into the Canadian Prairie here, and you're just going to continue to see areas. Let's zoom out so you can catch that again. There it is. that have been just very, very dry. Many of these areas well less than 40% of normal precipitation. So bigger picture, as we always do, next 10 days, what's the probability of getting an inch of rain? So we've identified the Gulf Coast, New England, the stalled out boundary here, and the ridge riders that repeatedly hit this part of Kansas, Colorado, maybe clipping parts of Nebraska. But I'm watching this area very carefully because it's showing up dry in the models, yet the meteorology of an event where a ridge opens up would suggest we do get a lot of ridge riding storms into this area. North of that, storms coming in through here. I love seeing the storms in British Columbia and Alberta too. This is where we had a lot of wildfires going on. So let's take this and kind of look at what the pattern's really telling us this is going to do, and then we'll stretch this out into a temperature forecast and then a long range forecast at the end here. So playing it forward, these are the troughs and ridges flowing throughout the atmosphere through the end of this week. So we still keep this broader trough that's been in place for a while, knocking the temperatures back here while the heat stays in the western United States. But we're going to watch this ridge begin to open itself up in this direction once we get past the weekend and into early next week. So this is Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. The jet stream retreats north. It stays way up here. And as a result, this ridge comes out of California, Nevada, and comes back over here to New Mexico, Texas, parts of the panhandles, and then getting into Colorado. Now, normally when you see this flow, if we have moisture in place, we would watch for the storms to cascade over the top of it right into this area. And that's where the models were saying it was going to be drier. But the meteorology of this would say watch out for ridge riders right into that particular area, despite the models being dry. But by next Wednesday, this is bringing in a lot of heat into this area throughout much of the Midwest, in fact. Now, one of the issues that we've seen in the models lately, though, is that the models are having a difficult time maintaining this opening of the ridge and leaving it there for a while. So while it may be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday that we get the heat coming back into this part of the country, we don't expect it to stick around. There are some indications that once you get out there, like to next weekend, like the 29th and 30th, the ridge may retrograde. We may redevelop troughing in this area, and therefore we don't keep the extreme heat on for much of the Midwest, upper Midwest, northern plains into New England. All right, it tends to back up back to the west again. So keep that in the back of your mind, because as we look out there, our question is going to be, will we redevelop the deeper trough that's been here so far for the month of July, or will the ridge that's been building here really kick it out? This feature is beginning to move, though, and that's an important part of this pattern that we've had that we think is going to start to shift its way out of the picture here. So what has that given us? Well, if you take a look, let me do this first. If you take a look at what the flow has been so far through the month of July, we've had a lot of flow like this coming around. And with the ridges redeveloping, this has been the target area for a lot of our activity. And that's why when I show you the last 14 days of precipitation anomalies, we've been very stormy throughout this corridor. Now, we've been drier in the upper Midwest. We've been drier throughout parts of the Midwest here, very dry in central Texas, and drier in the western United States, which we've been covering. But take a look at how wet it's been over the last couple of weeks in New England, where we've watched that really just a tremendous amount of flooding in that particular spot. Now, this is going to be a map that I do think is going to change. It's our last 2 weeks looking at average temperature anomalies. Well, we've been stuck in the hundreds here, in the 110s into the southwest, and very hot into parts of California. Lot of cold air intrusions in this area that really have an expiration date on them now. They're going to be around for another 5 days, but after that, I expect things to start to warm up there. But the question is, as that ridge opens, what does that week 2 precipitation look like? The newest update from the CPC, has no longer got as dry as conditions. Can you almost see how they're trying to bridge over ridge riding storms in through here? Even the newest update from the European model is no longer as dry in this area as it had been. So I'm telling you, we have to see if ridge riding storms are going to be the result of that pattern flexing that ridge a bit more toward the central United States. Certainly inside of it, we're expecting hot and dry conditions. So hot and dry into this area as we go forward. Now, speaking of heat, this is the 4:30 a.m. temperatures this morning. And in Phoenix, it was still 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Dallas, it was 86. And there's a missing data point here in this part of Mississippi. So just understand that that's erroneous data. It's not 110 degrees there right now. But if we look at where these temperatures are going to go, we still have early this morning excessive heat watches and advisories that are throughout parts of the South, the Mid-South. They get into Oklahoma and Arkansas. That's how far north they go. We're still looking at this heat in the southwestern United States. The big thing I want to share with you that changed in this temperature patterns out there in that week 2. So it's kind of that last week of July where the Climate Prediction Center did open up a region in through here where there's a moderate risk of excessive heat. So that is where we get temperatures into the upper 90s, possibly cracking in the low 100s. What I'm saying is I think it's going to last maybe 3 or 4 days, not 15 days of this. I think the ridge retrogrades back to the west with time. That's typically what happens this time of year. So let's go ahead and have a look at the actual high temperatures. We're going to start off today. Again, a lot of heat in the Mid-South, 101 throughout much, the temperatures here in the low 100s in parts of Oklahoma, higher than that in Texas, and we still have the heat on in the west. So here's Thursday, Friday. As the front dips down, you just saw the heat stays always to the south and west of it. And then as we go into the weekend, this is Saturday's temperatures and Monday. Now remember, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday is when the ridge opens. So we end up getting these temperatures here that climb back up into the mid-90s. And that's what we've got out there by next Tuesday. So what I'm seeing right now is that next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, a place that's not seen a lot of excessive heat will be seeing it into this area. And if we just look out there and just take an operational model run, when you get up into this shade, we're up here in the mid-90s into the low 100s. So you can see that happening. That's next Tuesday night, getting into next Wednesday. So see the heat coming in here, and then going out there to next Thursday. Now what's happening in the European model is they're trying to drag another front through this area by next Thursday night, meaning that next Friday doesn't build in the heat as far to the north as it had. But if you're in this corridor, we're going to be seeing several days midweek, next week, and beyond that's getting that heat that's been in Texas a bit farther to the north. To see it on the ensembles, this is that 5-day sliding window of average temperatures. So as I said, we still have time here of cooler weather hanging around, but it seems to be building in more heat as we get out there day 5 through 10 and lasting through the end of July into the start of August. But I'm questioning how long it truly lasts into this area and if the heat does rebuild into the west, because we've seen the models do that multiple times in the month of July. Okay, let's finish this up with a bit of a longer term outlook. First, are we keeping moisture in this pattern? Well, as I start you out there at the end of July, we do see that the Gulf of Mexico is wanting to stay open. This map again shows us the probability of getting 1.5 inches of liquid in the atmosphere that could be used for storms. And that's why I say if that ridge does open, it will then dive into an area in through here that's got plenty of moisture, which means we're going to kick off a lot of storms in this area. And remember, as we get into the month of August, there's a lot of evapotranspiration coming off of our corn and soybean crops that are in this area. Sometimes 2,000 to 3,000 gallons of water a day per acre is getting evaporated as we get farther into the month of August. So we do have moisture in place to kick off these storms. But the longer range models, they're going to continue to show dry because of the overall pattern of that ridge being in place. So this is the newest outlook for the month of August. You do see that from Texas all the way to the Great Lakes into the eastern Canadian prairie. It's got a drier forecast, not dry, but drier forecast. And what we're going to be questioning here is, will there be lots of storms rolling through this that are not captured by the model? That's my forecast right now, because every time we see ridges building into this area, it storms on the downwind side of them, all right? But as it stands, if that ridge does sit somewhere in this vicinity, we should expect the temperatures to stay relatively warm, and that's what we've got here. A broader area that over the month of August could see temperatures, maybe 5 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit above average during that time frame. Now, here's the big wild card with all of this. It's always going to be the tropics. And once again, we see the European model attempting midweek next week to start to kick something off down here, possibly getting across the Atlantic into the Caribbean. Now, it's still out there kind of as a phantom storm, but I've now shown you this 3 days in a row, and we've seen the models continuing to want to produce something in this area. Should anything get into the Gulf of Mexico, we are going to be seeing systems that are going to blow up on the heat that's in this water and move very quickly to the north. But as it stands, over the next 10 days, there's somewhere up above a 50 to 70% chance of some tropical development in this area, according to the European model. Now, it's not on the National Hurricane Center website just yet. I'm just keeping you aware of what could possibly be happening down here. And I just want to remind you, the ocean temperatures in this area are extremely hot. We're well into the 90s in parts of the Gulf of Mexico, and that's supportive of quite strong storms. Last couple things to talk about. El Nino continues to build. These ocean temperatures are now a degree Celsius above average. We continue to see the cold water that's off the Baja of California. And there's a competition between that and the warm water with El Nino and the warm water north of it. But models have just come out suggesting that this El Nino continues to grow in strength. The newest update just released today from the Bureau of Meteorology. Again, they've got this up there August, September, October, out of that strong category, almost into the very strong category, and reaching a peak by December of almost 3 degrees C above average. So when you compare the Australians to the Canadians to the Europeans, the Japanese, the French, the Americans, and the British, they are all forecasting from August to September into October and November, all the way through December, that this El Nino is going to continue to strengthen. Now, thinking about that typically means something like this as we go from September to December. We tend to have a drier fall in the Pacific Northwest, but an active subtropical jet plus hurricane activity that could keep much of the South wet. So if you see warmer colors on this map, that's not temperature. This is the correlation with precipitation. So I'm very concerned about what it could mean for the hurricane season and an active fall, which could impact harvest in the midsection of the United States. Could we get a late season monsoonal burst out of this? That's also possible. All right. Last thing I want to finish up with very quickly here is I want to give you an update on international weather. One thing I want to point out is here in China, we've now seen the models go back over wetter for the North China Plain and the Manchurian Plain. I had some concern here about drought conditions. Also, look at the active Indian monsoon, very, very wet in that area. A lot of isolated storms in Central Europe as well. And there has been a pretty sizable heat wave in Central Europe, but it's kind of sliding over towards Turkey with time. Outside of that, this is your next 10 days looking at temperatures compared to average. And I think right there I'm going to wrap it up. So I really appreciate your attention. We'll talk again tomorrow morning. Thanks.